Yo, what's good, people? Izzy Max here, back again for some MDL pregame. This is going into week 7, and I'm joined by always with Dan. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So this is going to be the last week of interconference play, which is super exciting. We already have a couple coaches who are pretty much locked for playoffs, which is going to be me and Matt. I unfortunately have a bye this week, so I can't have as much fun like I did last week. But with that being said, we'll go ahead and jump into our transactions. And Dan, go ahead and take the first one.
So you dropped Sandslash and picked up Flygon. I think it's an okay transaction. They're both just underwhelming ground types that are decent for their tier. Flygon's stats are just, it has a great move pool, don't get me wrong, but its stats are 80 all the way around, except for, I think, attack and speed are at 100.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not going to hit any calcs, but it's Flygon, so it's cool, so you get style points, and it's probably going to do a bit more for your team than Sandslash, which is just a redundant Sandrush user. So generally probably a small net positive, but neither of these are going to be integral members of your teams for important matches. I'll put it like that.
No.
What do you...
Yeah, so I specifically tried using Sandslash against Hector, even though Sandslash has a terrible matchup, because I didn't use it and we're coming down to the end and I kind of wanted to figure out what on my team needed to change. And I tried using it in and out of sand. Base 55 special defense is god-awful. And even at base, I think it was like 65 speed in the sand, my Scarfed Lele was still outspeeding it. So I just realized, wow, that just kind of blows. I can just Scarf a Flygon and we'll be okay. So Sandslash, its move pool also kind of sucks. So it's whatever. I already have a Sandrush user. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Next up, we have Dina dropping Lurantis for Guzzlord. I know she brought Lurantis once, and if I remember right, it didn't get a kill, but it did some cool contrary stuff. Not sure what she's going to do with Guzzlord, because she doesn't really have a weak way of proccing the Guzzlord. And with Guzzlord having that quad weakness, it's just kind of weird. It does kind of help her middle Trick Room kind of set up. She does have a really slow Trick Room with, what is that mon called? Escavalier.
Yeah.
So this kind of just helps her middle speed tiers, and I don't really think Lurantis was actually offering anything other than a grass type for her team. So what do you think about this one?
I think it's decent. I had Guzzlord on my team a little bit last year. I definitely had some fun using it, but it's hard to get going the right way. It's difficult to build with. Its attacking stats are a little substandard. It's got massive amounts of bulk. You can invest further into the bulk. But you really need to trigger the weakness policy on it, and without a self brick break, unless Runarigus gets brick break, it could be trouble she could have some difficulty making sure that it does enough damage when she brings it. But it also does force her opponents to build a certain way. It forces at least 1 or 2 fairy attacks on basically every team she's going to face. So it might centralize opponents' building just a little bit to allow her to exploit it with some of her more powerful mons. But honestly, I could go either way on this. Lurantis is cool. It does some cool stuff, but it's a little underwhelming. Guzzlord, it's basically the same way, but in a different sense.
Now, she does have Riolu. I forgot about Riolu. It does get either vacuum wave. Yeah. So, maybe. But why don't you go ahead and take the next one?
Yeah, so Jess dropped Wobbuffet for Lopunny. She just brought Wobbuffet against me to meme, and Lopunny can actually do legitimate things. It can trick with an Assault Vest and Klutz. It's got access to Fake Out, Thunder Wave, Charm, I believe, Circle Throw. It can do a lot of cool things. So I think it's a pretty valuable tier 5, whereas Wobbuffet is just a meme. So I think this is a pretty solid addition to her team as she's looking to make a late season push for a wildcard slot. But what are your thoughts here?
It's a pure upgrade. I mean,
Yeah.
Wob was doing absolutely nothing other than memeing at the bottom of her draft. So getting some just all-around utility from Lopunny. And he can also be an attacker. I mean, I know when you had Mega Lopunny, you use like Fake Out Last Resort. Regular Lopunny can still do that, granted a bit underpowered, but like it's still capable of putting out some damage. So yeah, just an overall upgrade. This next one, Hector, dropping the Quagsire for Miltank. I actually really like this one because he now has kind of a decent immunity core. Miltank with Sap Sipper, Vaporeon with Water Absorb. Quagsire also had Water Absorb, so it was just kind of sitting there. You got your Poison immunity with Duraludon. You got multiple flying types for your ground immunities. Hector's, if you watch the game with me, he played very well. Granted, my team was crap. But those immunities actually played a big role. And just building another immunity in Miltank and dropping one that you already had, I think is actually quite nice.
Yeah, overall, I think this is a solid move for him because Quagsire and Vaporeon did basically the same thing. The one critique I might have for it is the amount of transactions he's doing in this tier 5 slot. Like, I understand each one of them has been for a reason, but overall, I think the move from Maractus to Quagsire to Miltank is lateral at best for his team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this part of it, I think, is pretty much an upgrade because it gets rid of something on his team that the role had already been filled and fills a new role. So I think this is good, but I just think his allocation of limited transactions has been a little questionable at times. But this individual one by itself, I actually do really like.
Yeah, this is the best tier 5 he's had.
Yes. Well, debatable. Maractus. Maractus is up there.
Yeah. So whatever. Why don't you go ahead and take the shaving of Doug Trio? What's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah. So we go from Owen Wilson to Owen Wilson with a bad haircut, and I mean it's pretty fine. They both do similar things. It loses the steel typing. In general, I don't really see a major reason for it. They're basically exactly the same Pokemon. So I'll call it a lateral move with a little bit of upside in that you get rid of some of the steel or some of the weaknesses that the steel type brought with it.
And Arena Trap.
Yeah, and Arena Trap. I guess if he's gonna, Perish Song and do round nonsense all at the same time, this might be the way to do it.
Oh, he doesn't have Aurorus anymore. There ain't no round now.
Oh, there is no round. You're right. But yeah, I mean, Doug Trio K does let you do a bit more maneuvering, so probably a slight upgrade, but not a world-breaking change for his team, I don't believe.
No, you pretty much said it all. It's Doug Trio for Doug Trio. It's the most lateral trade probably in existence. You're just dropping your steel typing and picking up Arena Trap. That's pretty much it. And then lastly here we have dropping Conkeldurr for Colossal from Toxic. Since he already has Dragapult, I feel like this was just a very good transaction. Maybe you might have even sniped this from him earlier in the draft or whatnot. I don't know. This was your last pick. I don't even know if he had a slot open for it. But it just naturally fits his team. Conkeldurr was just kind of sitting there, not really getting much usage out of it. Conkeldurr hits really hard and doesn't really need any setup outside of maybe a Protect for a Flame Orb. But Colossal is going to force him to build differently and build his team in a way that if you're going to use Colossal coming from someone who used it Season 1 and 2, you really have to build for it. Your entire team has to be built for it. Not just I can tech Surf on Dragapult and then nothing else. You need multiple ways to use Colossal if it's going to come, or if it's even going to get like solid usage. But I think this is just a solid trade. If you're not going to use Conkeldurr, grab something that can work alongside your Dragapult.
Yeah, it seems pretty solid. This is another one where it's solving issues over the long term that could have been solved in the short term, because Colossal was available when Toxic made his pick over Uniclus, and he posted in draft chat, I bet you guys think I probably should have grabbed Colossal here. Well, I've got a plan for it. And then he later dropped Reuniclus for Conkeldurr and now is dropping Conkeldurr for Colossal. So this is, again, like, I think it is the right choice for his team, given that he has Dragapult, and Colossal is really only good on Dragapult teams for the most part. But it's again like conservation of limited trade resources, something that could have been accomplished in fewer steps even during the draft, that ended up taking longer than it probably should have. But it is probably an upgrade for his team at this point in time.
Right, and he's one of those coaches kind of maybe fighting for a wild card slot. So making drastic changes like this, I just think makes sense. Now we have one more transaction cycle. So teams are going to need to figure out what they're doing quick. What is one team on this list or not on this list that you're surprised that made a change or didn't make a change?
See, I think at this point, Burst not making another trade just because he's made one every week so far is a bit surprising to me, but I also know that he's been on a bit of a hot streak recently and is happy with where his team is. And I think Grant is another one. I know he really likes his team and feels like he hasn't been playing as well with it as he should be. And it is hard to find what the transaction for him would be, but it does feel like something where he might want to change something up the last week to give himself a little bit of influx of energy, or maybe something people aren't ready for. So those are two that are on that list for me. What about for you?
Yeah, so Grant was actually one on my list as well. I think, and it's going to come up when I do the Red Division breakdown, because we haven't recorded it yet, but also when we get to his match, he's brought the same 5 to almost every match. And then last week and the week before, he brought the same 6. Which, that's fine if you have a core. I have a core. I pretty much bring the 3 top mons that I have pretty much every week and then just build around them. But where he's kind of struggling is his core is his top of the draft. I think he needs to kind of dive down into tier 4, maybe even tier 3, and just start changing some stuff up. If he doesn't think he's going to make playoffs, which he still has a shot, he really needs to just kind of blow it up in the last week of transactions and just have fun. Use mons you haven't used yet. Learn. That's pretty much what he's doing this season. And the other one I have is actually Dark. I know he kind of forfeited against me, but then he lost to Burst and had a bye week. So he's had pretty much 3 weeks of a loss and then nothing. So I think he could have used it to kind of blow up a little bit of his team, not so much all of it, because I think his cores are good. But some things that have been dropped from other coaches, I do think could be upgrades from some of the things that he already has. But those are the 2 coaches that I was kind of surprised not to see. I know Dark, I don't think has made a transaction all season, so it's not incredibly surprising. But yeah, so moving on to our first game, we have Hector versus Burst. I'll go ahead and take this one. For Hector, I actually picked Duraludon, and for Burst, I picked Naganadel, so the 2 dragons on these teams. On Hector's side, the Duraludon is actually really interesting. So outside of a few technical techs that Burst can have, like a flamethrower or something, Rhyperior is really the only way that Duraludon is going to get hit for super effective damage, but that's still on the physical side. So Duraludon might be able to take like 1 Max Quake and live on a decent amount of health. But everything else really can't hit it, especially on that special side, since Duraludon has very pitiful special defense. So I feel like if Hector can kind of position his Duraludon like he did against me and save it for like a late game max, I really do think that could be advantageous for him and just put him on the front foot for the rest of the game. And then alternatively, I have Naganadel. So it's pretty much outspeeds everything on Hector's side, not in Tailwind. I do know Hector likes to set Tailwind with the Aerodactyl, which I still think is very smart for this game. But Naganadel's move pull kind of makes it very versatile for this match. Burst has been up and rising this season after his first 2 quick losses. So I think that this is going to be very good for Burst's team, and seeing that Naganadel can be so moldable with its moveset, I think is actually going to be really, really good, and it is one thing that can hit Duraludon on the special side. But why don't you talk me through Charizard and Rhyperior?
Yeah, Charizard seems like a really good bring this week because it can hit almost everything. Maybe not the it's the Morgrim and maybe the Mesprit are the only two things that can't hit super effectively, because you can tech Scorching Sands on it and hit Naganadel if you want. Obviously, flying type moves for Blastoise, Scorching Sands for Rhyperior. It's a fire type, and Scorching Sands for Magnezone, Ancient Power for Talonflame, Solar Beam for Jellicent, Flamethrower for Mr. Rhyme, Fire Attack for Sceptile Maractus. Like, he can build this Charizard to beat anything on Burst's team, except for my pick for Burst, the Rhyperior, because even if it does hit the Rhyperior, Rhyperior is going to be able to take most of those attacks pretty well and KO it back. So that's the chess match this week. Burst trying to preserve things from the onslaught of Charizard, and Hector trying to make sure that he's able to neutralize what the Rhyperior is able to do and KO most things back with Charizard. So at least that's how I see this match going. But again, it could go an entirely different way. But I do think Charizard is a very powerful bring this week, maybe with Sunny Day Klefki or something.
Yeah, so basically what we're saying is this is going to be a chess match of positioning. So, moving on, Dina versus Matt. Go ahead.
Yeah, so looking at Matt's team, this Rotom seems to have a pretty decent matchup. It can hit the Steela, it can hit the Mamoswine, it can hit the Pelipper, and those are really some of the main attackers on Matt's side. It can also hit the Archeops if it wants. It can set up in front of things, and of course it has Will-O-Wisp, which does a decent number to Grimmsnarl and Mamoswine and a few other of the physical attackers on his team. So I think Rotom has a very decent matchup. And for Matt, I think if Raichu is able to protect the Celesteela has the chance to go in, because if you can get Raichu and Rain Up with Celesteela, there's not really anything that Dina has that's going to be able to threaten it severely. And Celesteela can just do a number to a lot of her team, specifically that Clefable. So I think it's going to be a very interesting match where, again, Rotom, I feel like, has been Dina's MVP this year, and it's going to have to continue to be for her to have a shot in this one. But why don't you tell me a bit about Cinderace and Mamoswine?
Yeah, so Cinderace plus Riolu, I think, is actually going to be the pick here. And specifically for that reason you just said, the rain. Okay, he switches in Pelipper. Well, Riolu has Prankster and sets up a Sunny Day on your switch in. Now you have a sun boosted max, max kickball or whatever the heck it's called from the Cinderace. And that's gonna obliterate, if not just completely chunk, this Celesteela. So I do think that's actually a big play, especially since Matt has kind of liked to lead the Celesteela. I do think that might be kind of a good play for Dina. It also allows her to just kind of be free with some of the decisions that she could make. Alternatively, the Mamoswine is actually kind of interesting. With Thick Fat, it can actually kind of take a fire move from the Cinderace. Immune to the electric moves that Rotom wants to throw at it. Can't really hit Rotom very well, but I think it gets like Seed Bomb. It might get a grass move. But other than that, it kind of just chews through the rest of Dina's team. Escavalier doesn't want to take too many hits from a Mamoswine. Articuno drops, Noivern drops, Runeriga's not really. So I just think Mamoswine late game, like Matt has actually always been doing, really, really, really looks good and is so threatening if some of those checks are just kind of gone. So I do like this matchup, and I think it's going to, again, come down to positioning and whose main sweeper can kind of just go off first.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think this is going to be a very good matchup, and it's also going to be pretty key for positioning in the blue division, because right now we have a three-way tie for second, and only second and third get that bye, whereas fourth and fifth have to fight in the wild card. So picking up a loss at the end of the blue division season is really not easy. So Dina, Charles, and I all have very important games this week.
For sure. Moving on, we have Ryan and Dark. So this one is actually kind of weird, and I picked Indeedee just because of how weird it is going to be. Dark hasn't done a lot of the proccing things that his team can do, but like I said, he's kind of in a lull, needs to pick up some momentum, so maybe he throws out some of those harder offensive mons with some procs, and Indeedee just kind of doesn't let him do that. Also, Priority kind of does hurt Dark a little bit with the Scizor in particular. So Indeedee, kind of interesting, and it can really just kind of soak up some of those Dracozolt hits, because with the Follow Me, you're not getting your max power off of the Volt Beak. And alternatively, I picked Togekiss. We haven't really seen an offensive Togekiss, but I really do think it is just so good in this matchup. Nothing on Ryan's team really wants to face off against a Crit Kiss, or even just a straight offensive like AV Kiss. Everything on Ryan's side really doesn't want to look at that thing, because outside of maybe Registeel, which you could tech a fire move, it's going to do decent damage, not great. But I do think that the Togekiss kind of just hits everything that Ryan has for really, really good damage. And again, Indeedee can kind of mitigate a little bit of that and get some good hits off on it. But if Togekiss is able to go off, it's going to go off hard. But why don't you tell me about Licky and Milotic?
Yeah, so Milotic is my pick on Dark Side. I think that one's going to be easier to explain. Because if you look at Ryan's main threats, Moltres, Blaziken, Axorus, Raikou as well could be included in that, but he uses it as a support option a lot, and even Marowak can be included in that. Milotic has a very good matchup into a lot of those, except for the Raikou. So I think the potential for setup Milotic, either finding a way to force a competitive trigger with a good switch, or finding a way to boost it somehow, actually has a decent shot of just sweeping through Ryan's team. And for Ryan, I dipped all the way down into tier 5 for the Licky, because I think he needs to use that Cloud9 ability to really shut down the sand on Dark's team. Otherwise, that Dracozolt has the potential to start going off into his team. So I think Licky is actually going to be important as a form of weather denial this week. And also, like, just look at it next to Indeedee. Like, there's a chance that thing can just belly drum up again. Like, that could just happen. But I think more as weather denial this week is the play for it. I did also briefly consider Haxorus because it looks like it has a decent offensive matchup, but the Milotic really gave me pause on that.
Interesting matchup, and I think this is one of the important ones as well. Like you said, a lot of the blue division is kind of tied. Same with the red division. We got 3 coaches fighting for that 2 slot. And this is basically going to break one of them because these are the 2 of the coaches, Burst being the other one. And I don't have a game yet, so I can kind of talk about this. This game here is the only reason I am guaranteed to be out of wildcard, because this knocks one of these 2 guys farther than I can get if I just lose out. So that's super important.
Does it? Because it knocks them to 3 losses, and if you lose out, you'll be at 4 losses.
I won't be at 4 losses.
If you lose out.
Yeah.
That's what you said.
Okay, but I don't...
So mathematically, not quite.
But they also have to win out, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
So...
That's true.
Yeah, and both of these guys don't have great matchups in the in the out of conference. But next, it's just me. So, you versus Hunter. This is actually really important for Hunter. More than you. I mean, you need to win to kind of stay out of that wild card slot, but Hunter kind of needs this to be in the wild card slot. But after seeing his match against Jess, I feel like he kind of struggled with kind of like anti-weather, just being able to outspeed and do some really good damage. Granted, I know a lot of Jessica's offense came from that multi-scale, multi-scale, whatever it is, the Dragonite, being able to take a hit. But on this side, you actually have the Tailwind instead of the really good weather denial, which just kind of matches the rain with the Kingdra. But you do have things that also hit Kingdra really, really hard. So I do think Tornadus is going to be super important for you, just being able to put yourself in the advantage most of the time, either with Tailwind or just resetting weather. I think this thing gets Sunny Day. Does it get Sunny Day?
It only gets Rain Dance.
Oh, well, that sucks. You ain't clicking that. But Tailwind is probably going to be good enough for this match. There are a lot of offensive mons that you have that do really, really go in on Hunter's team. But for Hunter's side, I actually have Metagross. He's also said he's not really using Metagross the best. But I think this is one of the matchups where he really can just put a lot of eggs into the Metagross basket. Because if you look over here, Garchomp is a problem for Metagross, but you do have things like Ice Punch. Oh, excuse me. You do have things like Ice Punch. Azelf is an issue, but I don't really know what it does other than it goes fast, hits hard. So I don't know what it can do to the Metagross. But all the other things are either slower than it or doesn't really want to have Metagross on the opposing side. So I do think this is going to be a Metagross game for Hunter, but if you can just put yourself in advantageous positions with this Tornadus, I do think this is just kind of rough for Hunter, and I hate saying that, but I really do. If you can just take away what he wants to do, I do think it's going to be a struggle unless Metagross can really just go off.
Yeah, I would give a pretty similar analysis for this match. I haven't looked too much into it. I just had a VBA match earlier, so I actually haven't looked at this match at all, really. But what you're saying is right. Hunter has struggled with opposing forms of speed control, so I could see Tornadus doing really well here. Maybe Hunter's Trick Room mode comes. It doesn't seem to have the best matchup in my team, but as a form of surprise factor. And I also think the Thundurus has a chance to do some work just because I happen to have 2 Mons with Intimidate, so it could come. But overall, it's a very interesting matchup that my team seems like it's going to be the harder puzzle to unravel for his team than his team is for my team. But by no means is that me saying that I should be the favorite here. Like, I haven't had a win since week 3, so it's going to be very important for me to sort of right the ship this week. But as we all have our anime redemption arcs, I do have the power of God and anime on my side, so it could be rough for Hunter this week.
There you go. Next up, you can go ahead and take this one, John and Grant.
Yeah, so we've got John and Grant. I am picking Mantine for John, which is a personal favorite of mine after it's been putting in some work for me in the VBA this season. Mantine has a pretty decent offensive matchup into everything but Jolteon on Grant's team, and Azumarill to some extent. But it can hit Landorus, it can hit Venusaur with the flying type move, it can hit Ninetales with the water type move and set the rain that way. Sableye Frail. Azumarill's, 50-50-ish with it. Musharna, it's very, very specially bulky. That's also why it's really good against Venusaur and Ninetales. Jolteon, yeah, that's not the matchup you want with the Mantine. But other than that, this Mantine really has the potential to do a lot of work this week. Let him fight for weather as well. So I do think that the Mantine almost needs to come this week for John. On Grant's side, I'm going to go with what's been one of his favorite mons so far this season with the Azumarill. Although it has the capacity to struggle with Rillaboom, it could also, I think, support Azumarill this week is something that has the potential to come out, like a Sap Sipper set, which could really put a damper on some of John's plans with the Rillaboom. But outside of that, if he does go with the offensive Azumarill, I mean, it hits the Volcarona, like Volcarona gets erased. Regirock's really bulky, but it still doesn't like to eat a max geyser from it. Hitmonlee doesn't like Play Rough. So I think this Azumarill could do work either offensively or support, which is why it's my pick this week, just because of its flexibility. But you picked 2 probably more standard choices, so why don't you tell me about those?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the Volcarona. We'll get to Landorus here in a sec. I think this could be a mixed support Volcarona. When I say mixed support, I'm not saying mixed attack. I'm saying support with offensive options. because I do think Rage Powder is actually really, really good, and it could come out as your lead, and you could either max it if you see a Venusaur lead from Grant, or you can leave it back doing Rage Powder things for things like Mantine if Venusaur is not on the field. I do think that that is very important, and then you can get your own weather, you can start setting up max airstreams. So I do think the Volcarona, in more terms of being flexible, is the pick for me in this matchup. Alternatively, though, I did pick the Landorus more so to counter said Volcarona. Not only that, John doesn't really have a whole lot of things to really hit the Landorus. Like, there isn't a whole lot of ice coverage on John's team. Maybe like Hitmonlee maybe gets Ice Punch, I don't know. And then the Mantine, of course.
I think Regirock gets Ice Punch.
Regirock was the one with Ice Punch, yes. And Regirock really doesn't want to be taking max grounds or intimidates either. So I do think Landorus can really put in a lot of work. And it is one of the hard counters to that Volcarona, who I think could do really good work being kind of a mixed offense support set. This is also a really important match because I think these are the bottom two guys in red.
Yeah, I think they'll need a win to build some momentum towards challenging for those wildcard spots.
For sure. Next up, I believe, yes, this is our last match. So why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, so we've got Jess and Charles. So it's a very interesting matchup here because Jess's Landorus, which she hasn't been able to use yet, kind of goes in on a lot of stuff. Not necessarily the Mudsdale and the Corviknight as much, but like it makes Heatran hard to come. It can threaten a lot of damage on the Latios, and it can threaten to kill basically everything but Mudsdale and Corviknight. Which is also why I think the Corviknight's going to be really important for Charles as sort of a check for the Landorus, which sounds weird. And then you've got the secondary matchup when it comes to Jess's Hail mode. But I'm going to let you cover that when we get to your breakdown. But overall, I think finding a way to check the Landorus and then have consistent damage output next to that check is going to be important. So I think actually Heatran and Corviknight working in tandem is going to be very important for Charles's chances this week. But why don't you tell me about your thoughts?
Yeah, so of course I did pick the Hail Sweeper in Arctozolt. Outside of, well, nothing. It kind of just eats everything. Latios not wanting to take ice moves. Heatran, this thing gets Stomping Tantrum. Corviknight not wanting to take electric moves. Liepard we'll get to here in a minute. Mudsdale ice moves. Aromatisse, it's Aromatisse. I don't really think it's doing anything offensively to it. Trick Room could be a problem. Heracross is probably the main offensive check to this thing, that and Gastrodon. So I do think offensively the Arctozolt requires a lot of counterplay from Charles. But with your pick in Landorus, that counterplay kind of gets a little more difficult. Because if you're countering one, you're not really countering the other. Which is why I actually did pick the Liepard. Fake Tears into a lot of these things next to maybe like a Scarf Heatran or Charms. Not so much the Thunder Wave set because these are two electric immunities, but I do think the Prankster Liepard just doing Charms, Fake Tears, Fake Out, really, really puts a lot of pressure on Jess's offense. So I do think the Liepard is going to play a very crucial role in Charles getting his offense rolling because he doesn't have the most offensive team, so he does rely a lot on his support mons. So I do think that Liepard is going to be that support mon of choice this week.
Absolutely. I think it's a pretty interesting matchup overall. And again, this one could have some seeding implications because we've been talking about the coaches at 3 and 2, but Jess is sitting at 2 and 3 right now, right?
2 and 3, I think at like -1 or 0 or something like that. It's very close.
Yeah, so she has the opportunity to move into that conversation for a bye in the blue division as well, and that could really screw it up because then there could be 5 players fighting for those 3 slots with the bye and trying not to get relegated into the wild card game, with Hunter and Toxic still trying to make a move as well. So this is a very, very important matchup because this could move them into a tie.
Especially with Dina playing Matt, yes. I do think these are... The blue division right now is kind of in flux, because I think Matt is really the only one that kind of can't move. There could be some things that make him drop into the 2-3 slot, but he can't really drop into the wild card slot. But every single body from 2 to Hunter and Toxic kind of can drop out of playoff at any minute, which is, I think, really... This is going to sound weird, but it's really good because I feel like the competitiveness is making play better because everybody wants to make playoffs. Let's be honest. Nobody's coming in saying, yeah, I'm just going to play and not make playoffs. It's whatever. Everybody wants to make playoffs. So I think this is awesome. Specifically the blue division. Red division is a little... It's tight, but it's not as tight as this one is.
Absolutely. And I think that also plays into my match of the week selections. I think we can leave it on this screen. I think this one, in terms of seeding, is going to have so much impact that it is absolutely massive. Coming out of the blue division, like this is going to be the match to watch when it comes to competitiveness and what people need to do in their out of conference schedule. But what about you? What's your pick for the match of the week?
We're gonna stay right here.
Okay.
I do agree. This is one of the more important matches, maybe the most important match for playoff seeding. I don't really know what their out of conference looks like, but you could be anywhere from fighting me, Ryan, and Burst to a mixture of all of it. Like, you don't really know. And this is just so important. The winner of this game probably gets guaranteed into that wild card slot, if not higher. I think I just can't stress enough how important this match actually is.
Absolutely.
That's gonna do it for us. Yeah. Things are going to get really interesting next week when we start talking cross-division, because I guarantee you none of the coaches have been looking across the division, seeing what's going on, mostly because it hasn't really mattered yet. So I do think next week is going to be next week's pregame is going to be a little more this needs to happen for this needs to happen for this, because there are going to be some huge playoff implications for out of conference. But any closing thoughts?
I am really looking forward to getting that cross-division play going. Maybe we'll get a bit of banter. We'll keep a running tally on the overall record between the two divisions, something like that. And then blue division will just assert its supremacy. So I'm very much looking forward to it. But this is going to be a fun week, the last one inside your own divisions.
Yep. So without further ado, guys, we will see you in the next one. Peace.